So in this question we've been given the cumulative density function of some distribution. So we've got capital F of x equals 1 minus the square root of 1 minus x squared. And x is a random variable from 0 to 1. And what we want to calculate here is the median, the lower quartile, the upper quartile, and the probability density function at the end. So cumulative density function, what this will look like on a graph, if we have our random variable x, that will go along the bottom, and our range here for our cumulative density function just goes from 0 to 1, because the total of all probabilities will just total to 1. So hence that's why that is. And the graph will always be monotonic and increasing. So this would make a suitable graph of a cumulative density function. What you're never going to get is something that goes like this or like this. It's always gradually increasing. So if I just take this off the board, our cumulative density function here, 1 minus the square root of 1 minus x squared, on a graph that's going to look something like this. So it goes from 0 to 1, that'd be our x value, and here we've got 0 to 1 here. So this graph here would look something a bit like that, and our endpoint here would be at 1, and our x there would also be at x equals 1. So for our median, lower quartile and upper quartile, what we've got here, we want our quartiles. For example, our median is the Q of 0.5. So therefore what we're looking for is when our y-axis, or here our quantile axis, is at 0.5. So that will be our quantile there. Our lower quartile is at 0.25. So that would be the 0.25 quantile. So again, that one would be at this point. And the upper quartile, of course, is the 0.75. So that would be at this point here. So that's 0.75. Okay, so that's the bits we're trying to find here. So as we're given our cumulative density function here, so our CDF equals 1 minus square root of 1 minus x squared. If we want to find our median, we just set this cumulative density function to a half. So therefore we've got 1/2 equals 1 minus square root of 1 minus x squared. So all we need to do now is just solve for our x, and that will tell us where our point will be. So what we're looking for here is this value here for the lower quartile there, and our upper quartile there. They're the points we're looking for. So we're looking for the points on x. Okay, so let's just solve for x. So we've got minus the square root of something. So I don't want a minus there, I want a positive. So I'm going to bring that onto this side and bring the half over this side to keep everything positive. So then half comes over here. I've got 1 minus a half and the square root of 1 minus x squared. Okay, so now what I've got to do now is to square both sides to get rid of this square root term. So now square that and square that. So this will just leave me with 1 minus x squared. And here I've got 1 minus a half, which is a half. Square a half, I've got a quarter. So that's what I've got there now. Okay, so now back into minus x squared territory. I want to bring my minus over this side to make that a positive x squared. And therefore my 1/4 I'll need to bring to this side. So I've got 1 minus a quarter. Okay, so now all I need to do now is take the square root of both sides. So take the square root of that and the square root of that. So square root of x squared, that will give me x. Okay, and here I've got basically 3/4, so I've got the square root of 3/4. So square root of 3/4. So that's the same as square root of 3 over square root of 4. So therefore my x will equal square root of 3 over 2. Now you'll notice here I jumped straight away to the positive ones. I didn't include my plus or minuses because x is not going to be a negative value here. My range is from 0 to 1, so I ignored the minus signs. So I went straight for my positive side. So here my median is square root of 3 over 2. So that's what I'm going to put in there. So I've got square root of 3 over 2. Okay, so I'm going to take this off the board and now I'm going to calculate my lower quartile. Okay, right, so now my cumulative density function for the lower quartile, I'm just going to set it to 0.25, which using fractions, I'm just going to call it a quarter. So now a quarter equals 1 minus the square root 1 minus x squared. Okay, so same rules as before. Bring this one onto this side to escape the negative, and then my quarter I'm going to subtract from this side. So now I've got square root 1 minus x squared is 1 minus a quarter. Okay, so get rid of my square root as I did before. Square both sides. Okay, so now I've got 1 minus x squared on this side. 1 minus a quarter is 3/4, and then 3/4 squared gives me 9 over 16. So just write that like that, square that, I've got 3 squared over 4 squared, hence 9 over 16. Okay, now bring my minus x squared onto this side. Seems a lot of effort, but it seems good to avoid these minus signs. So now bring this to this side. I've got positive x squared, and now my 1 will stay, and now subtract 9/16. So that will take care of that. Okay, so now square root both sides. So square root of that and square root of that. Okay, so this time again I've got my x, so I'm avoiding my negative values because it's not required in here. And 1 minus 9/16, so that's basically the square root of 7/16, which is square root of 7 over square root of 16. Square root of 16 is 4, so this is just square root of 7 over 4. Okay, so that's my lower quartile is square root of 7 over 4. So that takes care of that. Okay, now what about my value here for my upper quartile? So let's take care of that. Okay, let's take this off the screen. Okay, so now the upper quartile, let's go for that one. So now my upper quartile is 0.75, which is 3/4. And same business as before, set that to my cumulative density function. Okay, so bring this over to this side and then do 1 minus 3/4 on this side. So square root of 1 minus x squared is 1 minus 3/4. Okay, right, square both sides, get rid of the square root. Square that, square that. So then I get rid of the radical. 1 minus x squared. 1 minus 3/4 is a quarter, and a quarter squared is just 1 over 16. Okay, 1 minus x squared equals 1 over 16, so bring the x squared to this side and then 1/16 onto this side. So now I've got 1 minus 1 over 16 equals x squared. Okay, right, square root both sides. Okay, this side I'm going to be left with x, so ignoring the negative values of x because that's not included. And here I've got square root of 1 minus 1/16. Well, 1 minus 1 over 16, that equals 15 over 16. And then the square root of 15 over 16, that's square root of 15 over square root of 16. We know that equals 4. So now x equals square root of 15 over 4. Okay, so that's my upper quartile. So that's this one here. As you can see, that approaches very close to 1. My lower quartile is root 7 over 4. Again, that's somewhere near the middle. And my median is root 3 over 2, as you would expect, is in the middle of those two values. So that's one way of just checking that you haven't got any crazy solutions. So self-checking your answers is always a good way to go. So square root of 15 over 4. This 4 is not in the square root. Okay, so the last bit now, calculate the probability density function from my CDF. Okay, right. So probability density function. So my PDF, this equals my derivative of my CDF with regards to x. So my cumulative density function is what I can plug in here for my derivative. So that then equals the derivative of this function here, 1 minus square root of 1 minus x squared, and then all with regards to x. Okay, let's take the derivative of this. So the derivative of 1, that's just 0, so that just disappears. And then the derivative of minus square root of 1 minus x squared. Okay, so derivative of a square root, so we could write this square root as 1 minus x squared to the half. That's the equivalent way of writing that. And then with a minus sign here, that completes all of that. So now we've got 1 minus, so 1/2 there. We then multiply this function by a half, so we've got 1/2, and then our denominator is this function here, which is 1 minus x squared to the half, so that's 2 times square root of 1 minus x squared, and then we multiply all by the derivative of what's inside. So minus x squared, the derivative of that is minus 2x. So this, don't forget, is not 1 minus 2x, this is 1 multiplied by minus 2x. Okay, so let's just simplify this off and just go really careful on this one. So minus, our numerator is minus 2x, and then we've got 2 with this radical on our denominator. Okay, well, these two minuses will cancel out. Gives us a positive. The 2's will cancel out. So therefore our PDF is x over square root 1 minus x squared. So that's our probability density function. Okay, that's our PDF. Okay, and that completes our question.